wants to open in a word of prayer? Heavenly Father, we thank you for today. Thank you for your blessings. Thank you for protecting us and keeping us safe. And we pray that we would gain knowledge, insight, and understanding, and wisdom concerning this topic of trafficking. And help us to be able to be aware of what's going on, and also to be a part of it, and a part to stop this. And because we know it's not your will with all these things happening and the immensity of it. But we know you are bigger, and we know that you have the power, because you can do abundantly more than we can ask or think. And we thank you for that. In Yeshua's wonderful name. Amen. Okay, so Kenny has some her request there. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. It's just a limited number, but maybe one per couple, family. Anyway, so towards the end of the class, we can pray along these lines. At this point, that's where we could start. Human trafficking and sex trafficking. We had a class about this maybe a few weeks ago, and we covered a lot of stuff. But I just want to, for the newcomers, I just want to go over some things quickly, because I also printed off some stories. And couple of my sources are Shared Hope, International, and also, does anybody know James Robinson, Life Today?
Yeah.
So Life Outreach, International, my sources, and they do a lot of stuff like digging wells and feeding children, and they have something called Project Rescue. That part of the ministry is what they go and help. And officially, the meaning of sex trafficking is the recruitment, harboring, or transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for the purpose of a commercial sex act, where such an act is induced by force or fraud, coercion, in which the person induced to perform the act is under the age of 18. So we'll probably be talking about a lot of, concerning the people we're talking about is under the age of 18. And name some places that this is prevalent. We have the U.S. and
Be a shorter list if you say who doesn't do it.
what?
Be a shorter list if you said who doesn't do it.
You can just say it.
No, I said it'd be a shorter list if you name the countries.
Oh, right.
Or the countries that don't.
Don't do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually there are 58 countries that has sex trafficking. Yeah, you're right. And the main countries are U.S., India, Thailand, Cambodia, and Nepal. In the U.S., can anybody guess how many children are involved in this? It is 100,000 children involved in this. And it's not only girls, it's boys as well. And Kenny was telling me about, I don't want to forget what you said, Kenny, but you said in the news recently, around here,
Yeah, in Missouri, they quote a guy had some girls locked up in a trail.
So trafficking doesn't always mean sex, but the human part has to do with they getting children. And I've had cases, examples of that I think I went through the last time, where people in the States got children from different countries, whether Africa or Asia, and they brought them over, and the children are not educated, but they are left home to take care of the things, like the things, like say you have this family, and the family has children, and they bring over this child. The child like cooks and cleans and stuff like that. So the child doesn't have any education, and a couple of the cases that we read the last time, that the couple was persecuted, and for not letting the child, gain an education, and because of what was been taking place. And you've also heard of sweatshops over in other countries, maybe third world countries, and that's part of the human trafficking, to get the children to come and work in these places at a very, first of all, the children, they shouldn't be working, they should be in school. Secondly, they get paid very little compared to our money, and so they exploit them. So a couple of the main words is manipulation, and which is they're pretty close, but and exploiting. Anyway, I'll give you a general example, and I saw this on Shed Hope. There's a video of this girl that she grew up in an abusive home, and maybe physically and sexually. But then there's this guy who comes along, he's maybe in his 20s, and this girl is still in her teens, 13 maybe. And then he just strikes up a conversation on a game, and he just, talks, and he feeds on their emotions in terms of that he's just there to be somebody to listen to, and they probably exchange numbers, and they text each other, and he's just there for her, and emotionally he probably buys stuff for her and shows her, quote unquote love and attention. And then one day he says that he needs her help, that he doesn't have money, and he needs money, and he needs her help to get some money. She's emotionally attached to this person, and all the time he's kind of pulling her away from her family by showing her attention, taking her, meeting her at the mall, meeting her at these games. So one day he asked her, "Can you help me out? I need some money." So then she's hesitant when she finds out that he's asking her to do let's say dancing and stripping and stuff like that, and it'll only be for one time, So she agrees to do it, and then she ends up getting hooked into doing it. So she ends up becoming just doing that, and eventually he pulls her away from her family, and she ends up staying somewhere else. And it may be that person takes her away to a different state, so she's physically far from her family. So it's kind of hard for any good influence to be around, and all she's around is this environment. And this is one example of some of the things that takes place. Another example that I mentioned the last time, and this isn't so much here, but in third world countries like in India, having a girl is an inconvenience in terms of she can't bring in income as much as a guy can bring in income. And with a poor family living in a rural area, and this person comes along and says, I can find a job for your daughter in the city, and it wouldn't be a hassle for you. It would be helpful. And they don't. The family is happy, to do that. First, they not have to take care of the daughter anymore, and secondly, she's gonna have an income coming in. But when she reaches the city, she ends up being in these places where there's prostitution, especially, and this being illegal, of course, over here. In certain third world countries is not as a big deal, So they let it go by, and these girls are there, and they have no way out. There's no place to go. They would get threatened or beaten. Like say they want to leave, or say one of them run away, and they get caught, they would get beaten and stuff like that. And they have to make a certain amount of money for the day and stuff like that. So they'll be sad, but they can't afford to be sad, otherwise they'll be beaten or something, because there's a certain quota that they'll have to make. And so we're dealing a lot today about the sex trafficking part. There's some Q&A questions that I have, or frequently asked questions, I should say. All right. Let me read this one first, before I forget. How does pornography affect the trafficking industry? 1 out of every 5 pornographic images is of a child. That was mind-blowing when I read that. 1 out of 5. And 55% of child pornography comes from the US. That was another one that was, taken back. The sale of child pornography in the US has become more than $3 billion annual industry. In the study of 932 sex addicts, 90% of the women and 77% of the 90% of the men and 77% of the women indicated that looking at pornography played a significant role in their addiction. Viewing, anyway, talks about the brain, but Pastor Jean was commenting that recently sex trafficking on the whole took over drugs as the highest making illegal industry in the world. And drugs is a big industry in the world. Very big. So you can imagine, I think the last number I got may have been $34 billion, but it's probably higher than that. So let me ask another question. Who buys sex, or for the sex trafficking? The buyers of sex from juveniles can be anyone: professionals, students, tourists, military personnel, a family member. And they name some people here, and because of the camera, I'm not sure I should name them. But one of them is like a Hall of Fame footballer. One of them is a CEO for a big company. One of them is a governor or former governor, and stuff like that. So, and another question is, why don't the victims escape when they have the opportunity? Traffickers and pimps use physical, emotional, psychological abuse to coerce young women and girls into a life of sex trafficking. Traffickers are master manipulators and employ tactics to create a trauma bond between the victim and trafficker. And traffickers use the threat of violence against the victim or a victim's loved one to secure their submission. So those are reasons why the victims don't escape. Some of them have the opportunity, like over here, to escape, but they're just hooked on it, and because of manipulation and physical dependency or emotional dependency on this person, who's shown them love and whatever, they just stay with them. And there's a movie called Taken, and that movie. Anybody who's seen that, give you an idea of trafficking. The star, his daughter went to Europe and she met these guys, strangers, and this girl and her girlfriend, right? She went over and she got kidnapped, and then she ended up, being part of this. So, they say what makes a child vulnerable to sex trafficking, and the answer they have here is age. I think age, and also a lack of love in the home, and a lack of emotional support in the home. A lot of needs that the child would have, not necessarily physical, but emotional and stuff like that.
Naive too.
Yeah.
Like in Taken, I mean, both parents loved her and she had a good life, but she was just naive. It wouldn't happen to her.
Right. So, and we know that these are the end times. So, and involved in that, there's a lot of lost, because the ones who are fueling it are the ones who are paying for it, and the ones who are wanting to, the clients, I guess, are the ones, and with these last days, with things getting darker, these are just one of the things. And there are even worse things that I don't want to mention, that they do in some of those countries. And my word, it's already 10 till 3. And I have some, I'll just go straight to some stories that I have. And I'm gonna name I have something called policy issues that I want to share before I go to that. And it says the first one is eliminating the demand. The second one is prosecuting traffickers. The third one is identifying victims. The fourth is providing protection and access to services and shelter for victims. Let me give you an example before I go on. Like in the truck stops, and we talked about this in the prayer group before service. The pimp or the trafficker, he takes the girls and he just drops them off, or he just takes them there, and then they go where the truck stops are, and then they go and knock on the doors for these truckers, and these girls, of course, they probably brought from another state, maybe they lived in New York and they went all the way to Washington or something. And what Kenny said earlier, it happens in Missouri too, and I didn't really want to go into that much, but it happens in a lot of maybe all of the states. And it says eliminating the demand. Buyers are not being recognized as a critical component in the sex trafficking of children, yet demand is the primary driver of the commercial sex industry in which children are being exploited. So prosecuting traffickers, number 2. Frequently, the arrest and the prosecution of the trafficker is based solely on the victim's cooperation in the investigation and the testimony at trial. This, however, can place a heavy burden on a domestic minor sex trafficking victim, who typically requires a lengthy amount of time before they will disclose the facts of their victimization. And thirdly is identifying the victims. Misidentification of victims is the primary barrier to victim rescue and law enforcement response to domestic minor sex trafficking. Misidentification causes a chain reaction of negative outcomes, the most significant of which is the failure to deliver the necessary services to interrupt and treat the trauma of these children have endured. And providing protection, access to services and shelter for victims. Law enforcement officers express frustration with the fact that they are often compelled to charge a domestic minor sex trafficking victim with delinquency offense, such as prostitution, in order to detain her to keep her safe from the trafficker. Detention, however, is detrimental to the victim in that she rarely receives any services in detention, much less services specific to the trauma endured through sex trafficking. Due to the unique trauma bonding that occurs between a victim and her trafficker, these children often run from juvenile facilities right back to the person that exploited them. That's real bad. They go right back. Some places where there's some major sex trafficking takes place at certain events like the Super Bowl. Jackie was telling me earlier that on the news it was when the Super Bowl recently took place that they were telling people to be careful of human and sex trafficking in wherever they had the Super Bowl. And also maybe the Winter Games where they had recently, what they do is, because there's so many people come into those games, that they bring women from maybe around the world to that specific area. So they probably brought them to Sochi, where the games were, and wherever the games were, they've just brought them to that. And even World Cup soccer coming pretty soon. So that the people who attend those games, they have a place where they can sleep with these girls. And of course we know this is from the devil, but with respect to restoration and healing, the scripture says in Isaiah chapter 61, remember this was the scripture that Yeshua read in the synagogue. The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to preach good tidings to the poor. And He sent me to heal the brokenhearted, and to proclaim liberty to the captives, and the opening of prison to those who are bound, and to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn, to console all those who mourn in Zion, to give them beauty for ashes, and the oil of joy for mourning, the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness, that they may be called the trees of righteousness. So the Lord, whatever is evil, we know that He has the power to turn it for good. So hopefully those prayer requests, we can do it. May have time today, or when you go home, you can pray along those lines. And there's another scripture that says, the Lord, He doesn't have thoughts or intentions of evil, but thoughts of good and a future. And unfortunately, the future of these girls have been robbed, sadly, robbed of education, robbed of just their innocence, robbed of a normal life with him. The Lord is gracious that we've been protected and blessed. And he also said, Yeshua said that the thief came to steal, kill, and destroy, but he came to give life and life more abundantly. And this is death, this is destruction, and this is stealing from them. And that's not fair, you know. We know that life isn't fair, but Yeshua has the power to turn things around, and there's still hope. And organizations, they're working to stop that. I know this missionary that in India, she helps out these girls, and this helps teach them a trade, teach them to sew. I went to a bookstore in Springfield, and they have products that they have, Lifeway, that of made by girls that have been, or women that have been in the sex trafficking, but they've been brought out and given a trade. I guess in that case it's sewing. There's another story where these two girls, they open a tea shop. So, all right, this first one is Carolyn's story of hope. A survivor's journey. I cannot even remember a time in my life when I received attention from an adult that was not abusive in nature. I grew up with both physical and sexual abuse from the age of 5 when I was first molested. And it never felt right, but it felt normal to me. At a high school wrestling match when I was 13, a 35-year-old man struck up a conversation with me. He would come often to these events and seek me out. He said nice things to me and made me feel good about myself. Eventually, he invited me to his house parties, and I was happy to get out of the house because things were really rough. Also, my parents were going through a divorce. It wasn't a big deal for me to be gone. I craved the attention I got from him. But then he brought me other men there to have sex with me too. It didn't really feel right, but it felt normal. I had a baby when I was 16 and I got involved with a gang after my mother took my child from me. As part of the deal, I was used by all the gang leaders and then passed down to the younger members. I was confused and unclear about what was going on. I knew there were drugs involved and money changed hands for sex with me and other girls, but I never saw any of it. I had numerous experiences with the child welfare system. They kept picking me up and returning me home, and I kept running away again. In my mind, I didn't feel safe anywhere. I felt safer any place but home. They put me in foster homes, and I ran away from those too. Then once I became a juvenile offender, I ended up in secure facilities, but I even found my way out of those. I decided to run out of the gang that owned me and moved in back with my mom. During that time, I had several abusive relationships, and at the age of 21, started working as an escort and in strip clubs. I fled in the middle of one night and hopped to a bus to Kansas City because I was in fear of my life. Almost immediately, I was approached by an older man who befriended me and then sold me to a pimp in exchange for some drugs. This pimp had 8 women in a house, and that very first night, they told me what to wear. They set me out on the track. They showed me how to get in and get out of cars with guys, and what to say when I got in the car, and what not to say, and how to recognize if it's a police officer. It was just like boot camp. Often there were underage girls in the house, and there was always a fight for affection. I guess they were fighting over each other to get affection from the pimps. He liked to keep us in limbo and to keep us competing with each other for his attention. I wanted all of it, and I would do anything to get it. Whether it be telling on the other girls or turning more tricks so I could give him the most money. I was determined to win him for myself, and I thought I had when he got me pregnant and moved me out of the house and in with him. I understand now that it was a branding technique, a way to ensure that I'd stay under his control. That and the other drugs that were waiting for me on my bed stand every morning did exactly that. I was prostituted for at least until she was 6 months pregnant. Motivated by that idea that I was his number one, in spite of the fact that I had seen him in bed with at least 3 other women at one time. I was never locked up, but I was in a prison of my mind. He was in complete control. He maintained it by alternating affection and brutality. If rules were broken, like being dropped off in front of the house by one of your tricks, someone got beat up. To make an example of everyone. Most often, it was me because I was the most loyal or needy, and he knew that there was no family I could run to. He broke my nose when I was pregnant with absolutely no remorse. He made rule breakers stand outside nearly naked for hours. In a federal prison now on drug charges, not for pimping. That's where he is. So he's in the federal prison. Despite his brutality, many of his girls are waiting and will run back to him when he gets out because his control over their minds is so complete. He is God to them. It doesn't feel right, but it feels normal, and that's all they know. Fortunately for me, I met a God who thinks of me as his favorite. And she met this lady from Veronica's Voice who has shared the experiences that I've had and overcome the same mental and physical addictions and humiliations. I have a great job and I'm perfectly suited for helping girls escape their bondage. And I hand out outreach bags to the girls who are still being used in prostitution and go visit the jails and meet the girls that have sexual exploitation issues. I also go to youth programs and share youth group recently for people ages between 13 and 21, where I educate them about pimp control and risk reduction. But most important, I'm building a life for my baby girl and I can live in dignity. When I go out to the streets now, is to share how different life can be. Usually when I pull up on them, they're so excited to see me, and I see that I made it out, and they say things like, if you can do it, I can do it. It gives them a lot of inspiration and probably hope, especially if they haven't seen someone in a long time, and I go to the jail and run into them and they're like, gosh, you look so good. How did you do it? Then I offer them different opinions, and even if they're not ready to get out, I still come back around. I may give them my card 50 times, and it might take a month or 2 months. Eventually, they end up showing up, even if it's just to take a shower or something to eat. This is a first step, an important one, to believe in themselves and find a new normal, one that feels right. And that's the first story. I don't know how much time I have. Maybe for one more story, or
You have your toy study, Kenny, or you can go ahead.
Alright, this one's called Anna's Story of Hope. So you all getting what the story is saying? These are real people, and you see the attachment they have to the pimp or the trafficker. And when they go to juvenile lockup and they come out, they go straight back to the person, So it's like an emotional dependency, they call it. leading the next generation of survivors. Anna's story of hope. Anna chooses to believe that the one person who loved her more than life died in the fire that left her, at least 3 years old, badly injured and without a home. The next 7 years and many placements in Chicago's foster care system convinced her that the pillowcase stuffed with her few possessions was her only constant in life. Although she was finally adopted at 12 by a loving Christian family who wanted to nurture and protect her, Anna, I think the word is chafed, C-H-A-F-E-D, in true 12-year-old form at some of their restrictions, like don't eat candy. She solved the problem by hanging out at the corner store where her allowance could satisfy her sweet tooth. But something else was at the corner, a new friend, who always bought her candy, and sometimes a little gift. As the months went on, she shared her fear that her adoptive parents might give her back, just as every foster parent had. Over the next 6 months, he became her best friend, a best and only friend, someone she could trust, someone she could call when the inevitable pack up your pillowcase moment came. And he had given her a pager for such an emergency. So her life, she's been moving through different foster cares, but when she finally got adopted by this Christian family, she still has that fear, which was sad. And the day came when the 13-year-old Anna had to fight her mom. She paged her new friend. Within minutes, he showed up at the corner store and she got in his car. Anna stepped off an enormous cliff that only be seen when looking back. Her friend became her master. He introduced her to violent sex acts and language to describe them to get her ready for the market into which she would be placed. He gave names to the things he had done to her and told her how to describe the acts she was to offer men who would pull up beside her on the street, or who would be waiting behind the door when she was delivered to a hotel or truck stop. Out of her mouth came the words that assured the buyer that she was like the girl he had seen on the porn he devoured, convincing him that this barely legal girl loved to do the things he fantasized. She spoke the language, which I guess, the talking was a big part of it. She couldn't possibly be innocent like his daughter or granddaughter. Anna's pimp moved her out of Chicago and then back again to be part of a stable of a dozen other girls. They were managed ruthlessly by an older girl, and I want to read the term, who had trained since she was 12. She knew how to take care of business when he was out. When the casinos and the convention cities had to be stocked, quote unquote, for special events, where patrons would be seeking younger girls, the whole stable was moved to the market. By her 16th birthday, Anna had traveled more and seen less than most people would in a lifetime. Through it all, she never thought of running. Wow. The violence and beatings were terrifying, but he was sweet to her and gave her attention and presence. She believed he really cared about her. Besides, Daddy, and that's what they called him, was her protection from the other pimps and violent buyers, and she knew that crossing him meant something dreadful would happen to her mother, he promised. Every daddy, said appeared to be true. He told her police arrest prostitutes like her that she would go to jail. He said men like him rarely go to jail, and if they do, they get out in days. And if she talked to police, he would get her, and her fate would be worse than anything she has experienced so far. Sure enough, she was arrested, not Daddy, and surely not the John. I'm not sure what that is. She learned quickly to lie to the police, serve her time, and find a way to call her pimp once they released her. If she was arrested and placed in a shelter or a group home, she was out of the back door the first night. At one point, early in her captivity, Anna sneaked a call home for help. Her older adopted brother answered the phone, and after listening to her plea for help, he told her, "You made your bed, I'll sleep in it." And he hung up. Oh my gosh. Thinking that he represented her parents too, Anna knew her fate was sealed. Not even the pillowcase this time. The story of Anna's escape from this life is one that space in this letter does not allow, but she did finally escape. Her parents never stopped looking for her. When they were finally reunited, Anna went to Washington, D.C., where her mother lived to care for her in her last days. Her mother embraced her fully and helped Anna establish a survivors ministry to help other sexual slavery. Anna runs an outreach program and a drop-in center for vulnerable victimized youth. And Shared Hope creates a restorative shelter network around the nation. Survivors like Anna are the leaders who can teach us to protect and minister to this uniquely precious group of God's children. So those are just two stories of a few that I had because of time. So you see on that prayer list that Kenny gave you, these are just a few things. And there's a quote here, as well as the prayer on the second page by an ex-pimp. It is possible to protect all the girls from guys like I was, because that's what we do, you know. Oh, that's what he used to do. We eat, drink, and sleep thinking of ways to trick young girls into doing what we want them to do. So it's about control and manipulation and exploiting them for money. So it comes down to the money for them. And for those buying, it comes down to fulfilling their lust. So you can check out these websites, and there are other websites, like I think there's a secular one called Polaris Project, Polaris Project, that you can look at too. So there's a lot of wisdom in this too, and I guess as parents, you're just careful as well as you know, to just help with children and grandchildren. So, any questions or comments?
Where did you get these stories?
It's from this website, Shared Hope,
Oh.
and on that website it has the other stories as well. Any other questions? It's not talked about much, unfortunately. You know, not much people talk about this. When I heard Life Outreach talk about this, I felt compelled to, give to them financially. That's the way I can help them. And I know James Robinson, his heart, he's a very humble guy. And, I know that he wouldn't misuse the money and use it for their good. So, in those other countries like India and Cambodia, Nepal, it's really, really bad there. And when these girls come out of this, they're shunned by their villagers. So,
I imagine.
it's not like they did something, they didn't do, it's not like they volunteered for this. So, but still they're, you know, they look down upon. So they have a hard life. And it's, of course, it's especially girls. Girls are more prevalent than boys. And again, it's not only sex, but other ways to for them to make money, exploit the children. And so when you go to those websites, it'll give you a lot more information. And yeah, so yeah, the prayer request would help. I think that's it.